I think you'll be throwing out the first pitch at the next home game. Honestly, show is going to be a huge hit. When everything goes terribly wrong, it's easy to look back and remember some of the things you wish no one would have ever said to you. When you're developing a new show that people are excited about, a lot of unwarranted compliments are tossed your way. This will run for 5 years. I'm amazed by your delivery. I'm just worried you'll get picked up by a bigger network. At the time, these compliments are exactly what you need, but 5 months later, they're the things that keep you up at night. Was everyone just full of shit? Were they lying to me? Why would they lie to me? Why am I crying in bed eating a bag of circus animal cookies and watching Serendipity for the third time? The following is how I sold and somehow lost a TV show in just a tad over 4 months. Only one name has changed, and that's basically because it's legal. Illegal to say what it is. But if you live in San Diego and you watch at least one Padres game, you'll probably figure out what that name is. About 4 years ago, a brand new sports channel came to San Diego, and let's just say the name of that channel rhymes with Locks Jorts. A couple of you got it. Good for you. I got very excited about this. Finally, San Diego would have a channel devoted to the Padres and presumably its fans. Of course, I wasn't very excited about watching anything other than Padres games, as most sports television is the same thing over and over again, and that same thing is extremely boring. Basically, every single sports-themed television show is made up of a panel of about 5 middle-aged men. One guy is the host, who usually is from sports talk radio and is there to keep the show moving along. His idea of humor is telling women to stay in the kitchen, and they almost all look like they're youth pastors or current members of the band Smash Mouth. The rest of the panel is all ex-players of whatever sport they're talking about, and they're there to offer up game analysis with comments like, "These guys just have to win," or the more wins you have, the better shape you're in come playoff time. Those are actual quotes. Rounding out the cast is usually a fairly attractive woman who is allowed to smile but not allowed to have opinions. It's embarrassing and notoriously bad. ESPN SportsCenter broke away from this stale format a while back with guys like Stuart Scott and Kenny Mayne, but they were sports writers and actual performers, and it made this a tad more interesting to watch. However, in recent years, even SportsCenter has fallen back into the traditional panel recap/opinions that are really more statements than opinions style of show. TV sports media has been stuck in neutral since the 1990s, using beer as an excuse for comedy and ex-jocks as an excuse for insight. A typical bit on these so-called sports comedy shows would include some large-breasted woman holding beer steins, while Shaquille O'Neal and 4 other guys you've never heard of laugh as is the funniest joke they've ever heard in their entire life. And if you're wondering where the joke is, so am I. I remember when I was a little kid and I would go and hang out with my dad, and all his friends would come over to watch football games. They'd drink a bunch of beer, eat chips, and say horribly sexist and racist things while their face turned red from laughter. As an 8-year-old, I thought they were the funniest people on the planet. Well, sports programmers are basically all your dad's friends with just less concern for your mom's feelings. And I haven't been 8 for a very long time. When Locks Jorts San Diego started, I was working in Los Angeles. Same 4 people, that's fine. Working in Los Angeles on a show called the Aquabat Super Show. It was in its last... Really? Wow, thank God. Where were you fucking people? It was in its last season, so we were also in development at Disney for another show. Things were going great. However, I still lived in North County, San Diego, because I've never owned a V-neck deep enough to legally live in L.A. I started to get this urge to try and get hired as a host on Locks Jorts, but I kept shrugging it off, not wanting to tamper with what I had. But I kept thinking, what if I could develop the type of show that was a sports show and the show that I always wanted to see? I'd always wanted to write and host a late-night talk show. Being Letterman or Conan was and is still my dream. So what if I created a late-night talk show in the spirit of Conan, but it was all about sports? We'd have real-life comedy writers and real-life jokes, not just a fart and a girl in a bikini or a girl in a bikini farting. A comedy show for sports fans who didn't consider themselves the barbaric cavemen they were told they were. I decided the opportunity was there, and I needed to try to make it happen. The show I was developing at Disney was off being animated, so this was the perfect time to try. Because of certain shows I've worked on in the past, I had enough clout to set up a meeting with their programming chief where I pitched him my show idea, and he loved it. I brought on a local TV producer I knew named Scott to help me figure out logistics. And right off the bat, Scott wanted to navigate away from the late-night talk show idea and make it more of a magazine-style show, kind of like Entertainment Tonight or 2020. I disagreed at first, but was ultimately down for whatever got on TV. So we went to work. I brought in some comedy writers who also enjoyed sports, and Scott brought in some crew that he felt would get the feel of the show. Everything was moving along just fine. And then out of nowhere, Locks Jorts said they wanted to see a pilot by the end of the month. This was weird, but wonderful. It was weird because in normal television development, you'll spend a year just writing one episode, another year casting and filming or animating that episode, then you wait another 6 months until someone in a very big office either takes you to lunch or sends you an almost polite email. In fact, the pilot I was developing at Disney was in year 3 of this process, so going from pitch to pilot in a month is unheard of. It's very dangerous, but extremely wonderful because they wanted to move fast, and I hate waiting. So we turned the pilot in 2 weeks, and they called us in for a meeting. We sat down in a large conference room that overlooked Petco Park, and the 3 main guys who run the station walked in. There's the programming chief, the head of everything, and the executive producer, who we'll just say looks a lot like John Goodman circa season 1 of Roseanne. Now, I feel like I need to explain something very quickly. When you pitch to an actual network, say CBS or ABC, there's an actual development department. There are development department execs and presidents and development interns, and they're all there to tell you how dumb or amazing your idea is. Or they tell you something like, I know your show is about World War II and it's set in America, but what if it was on the moon? They're rarely helpful, and they hold your fate in their hands, but on the upside, there's a lot of them. At Locks Jorts, a local affiliate, you don't have a department for new shows. You just have these 3 guys, none of which have developed anything other than 3 other guys who sit behind a desk and talk about how terrible or great Kobe Bryant is. It's not their job to do anything else. And this forethought would have been extremely helpful when the big boss, the first thing out of the big boss's mouth was, we're pretty disappointed. Followed with, it's not funny. The John Goodman guy echoed that sentiment with, I thought maybe it was an age thing, so I showed it to a few interns, and they didn't like it either. I felt like all the people in the world just collectively flipped me off. My producer asked for specific feedback, which was met by a barrage of general observations. Again, it wasn't their job to be able to tell us why they didn't like it. They just didn't, and they weren't going to put this show on the air. While Scott continued to try and get actual information from these execs, I just stared at this John Goodman guy. I literally got lost in his eyes, sans the romantic subtext. He kind of embodied the, I know what sports entertainment is, stereotype. He didn't want some kids to come in and change his mind, but god damn it, I wanted to. I wanted so badly to make this guy wrong. And then I remembered something that happened a couple weeks before this meeting. We were outside the Locks Jorts offices shooting a bit for the pilot, and John Goodman walked by on his way to the building. He started talking to us about different segments and ideas, and as often happens in San Diego, a gorgeous woman walked by. John Goodman immediately stopped talking to me, began to rub his belly, eventually resting his finger inside his belly button, and said, Jesus Christ, wonder if that girl can hold a microphone. I laughed it off and just wondered what the hell I had seen, and I know that I'll never forget it. Right now I'm thinking about it. And this was fresh in my mind as I sat across from him listening to this guy critique my profession. I decided he wasn't going to win. So I cut everyone off in the meeting and I said, stop. We can go back and forth, but it doesn't matter. The question is, can we go anywhere from here? They said they'd love to continue working with us, but not on this version of the show. So we left and we went to a bar across the street. While drinking, 2 things became very clear. 1, the magazine-style show was a mistake, because Locks Jorts ran nothing but magazine-style shows. So we basically made a show that made fun of magazine-style shows, and we essentially gave them this pilot that said, hey, what you guys do is stupid. Enjoy. 2, I could tell from John Goodman's notes and his weird belly button thing that he wasn't very smart, and that he and everyone else in that meeting needed to be told when to laugh. Not everyone knows when to laugh. It's why TV shows developed applause signs and laugh tracks. It's a lot easier for someone to enjoy something when they're being told that they should. Like the realization that IPAs are shitty, everything suddenly made sense. I told Scott we were going to reshoot the pilot the way I wanted to in the first place. We would make a late-night talk show for sports. However, we wouldn't rewrite any of the jokes from the first pilot. We would just now have a live audience there to laugh at them. He was on board, and a month later, we were back in the Locks Jorts conference room, and this time, we made sure to watch the pilot with them. When the audience laughed, the execs laughed. When the audience applauded, the execs smiled. Under the table, Scott was kicking my foot, and I just leaned back and watched the circus. By the end of the meeting, we had an offer for a weekly show starting in 2 months and an air date. It was so perfect that for 2 seconds, I just wanted to say, no thank you, we're good. We got to work once again, and in just 2 short months, we put together a set, a band, a graphics package, a writing and tech staff, an entire new show with 3 more episodes waiting in line. The timeline was ridiculous, but it was exhilarating. We had a show. The show I always wanted to watch as a viewer and a sports fan was coming to life, and I got to be in charge. And at this point, it was all I had. Disney passed on our pilot. The Aquabat Super Show aired its series finale, and my wife was 6 months pregnant. The show had to work. I was stressed, I was burned out, and I was starting to notice that as the premiere day got closer, a few things started to get a little weird. We began sending Locks Jorts promos for the show, but for one reason or another, they didn't air them. Our show's name was nowhere on their website or programming lineup. They never seemed worried about how things were going or if they could come to the taping of the premiere. I also realized the contract they had sent us and we signed had yet to be returned to us and signed by them. Our lawyer had mentioned this fact a few times, but we all just assumed that was because of the accelerated timeline, and nothing was weird. This kind of thing probably had to pass through a lot of execs and lawyers in different cities, whatever. Just keep pushing along and don't miss the air date. The day of the taping, I was rushing around like a madman. I was in the middle of picking up my suit when my cell phone would not stop ringing. It was my producer, Scott. I just figured he needed to pick something up or was getting nervous and wondering where I was, so I didn't answer at first. But he kept calling, and then he texted, "Emergency." "What's up, Scott?" "They're not going to do it." "What?" "Locks Jorts. They won't sign the contract. They're not going to do it." "What the fuck are you talking about?" "Just get down here. I need to know what you want to do." I raced to the studio, and Scott was outside with his head in his hands. Our lawyer was pacing up and down the sidewalk, yelling on his phone. Scott said they didn't know any specifics, but that our show would not be airing any time in the foreseeable future, and we were welcome to shop it elsewhere. We walked down into our studio, and I unloaded so many curse words that I think I made some up, like bitchcock and fuckbean. Our tech director walked up and told us that we should stay on course. We had already paid the crew, and through our social media efforts, we had a nice-sized audience lining up, and our guests were almost there. If anything, we would just make a better-looking pilot and shop that. I was completely defeated. So just to shut everyone up, I said, sure, let's do the taping. I walked across the street to a bar, and I started drinking. I called my wife, who had been out of town at a work conference, and she was in shock, and so was I. How did this happen? How did we lose a show that they sent us a contract for? And why would they wait until the day we were filming to tell us? I had about 1,000 questions, and to this day, I only have answers to about 4 of them. Our lawyers sued them, they expected it, and settled with us out of court. Small victory. They gave us this ridiculous reason as to why it fell apart on their end, and legally, I can't tell you what that was. However, let's just say it rhymes with bullshit. No matter what the truth was, the show wasn't happening. Our staff fell apart, and given the amount of anger and confusion between all parties, I knew there'd be no way to save it, pitch it somewhere else. It was done. Things moved on as they do, and about 2 months later, I got an email from John Goodman at Locks Jorts. He said to call him. He wanted me to come on their panel show about San Diego music and sports. I was really confused as to why he wanted me on the show, but I said yes. My wife and I went down, and as soon as I got on set, a few things became very apparent. One, this new show was their attempt to make my show that they had canceled. The bald guy on top is me. 2, this was an extremely bad attempt. They had a live band, and the guest panel for the show featured me, a former Padre named Mark Sweeney, and a current Padre at the time, Nick Vincent. I sat there in awe at the balls on John Goodman for putting me on this panel. The show started fairly quickly after I got there, and I was too thrown off to do anything but just try and stay professional. Then during the first commercial break, the host leaned forward and said to me, "Don't you think this show would be better with a live audience?" To which I replied, Are you fucking with me? He repeated again and again that he wasn't. I briefly told him that I sold a show to Locks Jorts that was basically this exact show with a live audience, and they decided against it the day we filmed our first episode. Everyone on the panel got very quiet. The floor producer told us 5 seconds to air, and the current Padre, Nick Vincent, broke the silence with, well, that's fucked up. We all started laughing. And we kept laughing so hard that as soon as we got back from commercial break, they had to immediately throw to another commercial. During that break, the host tried to get more information from me, but I just played dumb. There was no need to get more people involved. But I just sat and marveled at the audacity of John Goodman and the two other execs. Was their idea to have me on this show and just play along? Well, fuck no. I wasn't going to let them get away with their cruelty or their stupidity. So I decided in my mind that when we came back from this commercial break, I'd turn into Don Rickles on The Tonight Show. I'd start making fun of everyone, the network, the show, and so on. It was wonderful. I started off by saying my pregnant wife was in the dressing room and that I should get her out of there before the network tries to steal that baby as well. I called the band a cheap version of the Spin Doctors. And I told the current Padre, Nick Vincent, that I had just demoted him to the minor leagues in the video game MLB The Show. As the segments kept going, more and more crew members and staffers and interns came into the studio to watch. I often don't like to toot my own horn, but I was fucking killing it. People started filming it on their phones, and at one point during a commercial break, an intern poured beer into our coffee mugs, gave it to me and the former Padre, Mark Sweeney, and said, "Have fun." Sweeney told me, don't say anything about the beer. So in the next segment, it was the first thing I mentioned. Hey, Sweeney's getting drunk, and he's a baseball player. Great. They sit me next to the guy who's mixing steroids and alcohol. I laid into him more and more, and he was laughing so hard he was crying. My intention was never to be mean to the guests or the hosts. I just wanted to show the network what they had passed on. After the taping was over, I took a picture with the staff and the players, and as I left, I stopped by the sound booth where the same three guys from those conference room meetings were sitting. I said, "Hey, thanks for having me on. Anytime you want to produce a poor imitation of my idea again, just call me. I'd be more than happy to help." 7 months later, they actually did. And this time I said, no thank you, I'm good.